Welcome back, fight fans. Thank you, as always, for joining me. It's been a little bit since we last met, so I'm excited to get this video out here. We've got a really exciting card coming up this Saturday, October 5th, UFC 243 out of Melbourne, Australia, out of Marvel Stadium. So we're expecting an attendance of 60,000 fans or something like that, headlined by our main event, Robert the Reaper Whittaker and Israel the Last Stylebender Adesanya. So this is actually going to be part one of a two-part series. Here in part one, I was going to be going over the first 4 fights on the main card, but instead, because Holly Holm and Raquel Pennington has been scrapped due to Holly's injury, in this video we're going to be going over the second, third, and fourth fights on the main card. So Luke Juneau, Dhiego Lima, Tuivasa, Sergey Spivak, and Dan Hooker and Iaquinta. Those 3 fights. And then in the second video, I'm going to dedicate that one specifically to Robert Whittaker and Israel Adesanya. So if you haven't already, please hit the like button and subscribe if you like what you see. Well, let's get it kicked off here with technically the second fight on the main card coming to you out of the welterweight division. We got Luke the Jedi Juneau versus Dhiego Lima. And I apologize, I've heard Juneau's last name pronounced Juneau by John Anik and Dan Hardy. And then I heard Bruce Buffer call him Juneau. So I'm just going to go ahead with the majority decision here and call him Juneau. So betting odds for this fight. Lima is a -150 favorite. Juneau +120. A little bit of background on these guys though. So Luke is a New Zealander. He's 31 years old. He's 5'11" with a 72-inch reach. Luke started out at a boxing gym before he put in about 10 years of work to achieve his black belt in Taekwondo. Got his purple belt, or he's currently a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and is now an all-around mixed martial artist. So this is going to be his 4th fight in the promotion, in the UFC, where he's gone 2-1 thus far through 3 fights. His overall MMA record, 13-4. His last fight, though, was a win. It was a unanimous decision win, but it was back in February of 2018, so it's been over a year and a half since we've last seen Luke in the octagon. Interesting to note, he's got 4 losses. 3 out of 4 of those losses all came in 2013 or earlier. So he's only lost once in the last 6 years. Now, granted, he hasn't been as active as we'd like to see, but 3 out of 4 of his losses were 2013 or earlier. Dhiego Lima, he's the Brazilian fighting out of American Top Team. 30 years old, he's 6'2" with a 77-inch reach. So he is a 3-inch height and a 5-inch reach advantage in this fight. Very significant. 14-7 MMA record, coming off of 2 wins in a row. His last fight was a unanimous decision over Court McGee, and the fight before that was a super impressive knockout over Chad Laprise. Prior to that, though, he lost 3 in a row. So 2-3 in his last 5 fights, 5-5 in his last 10. But he's won 2 in a row, so he's really turned things around. I'm not sure what they're doing down there at American Top Team, but they're doing good things with Dhiego Lima. Taking a look at the striking. There are a few things that worry me about Luke in this fight. One is that he absorbs more strikes than he lands. Good thing for him, his opponent does too. Dhiego does as well. But his defense worries me. Luke is a good counterpuncher. But I watched 3 of his fights, and one thing I noted was that I didn't notice anything he was great at. He's a good fighter all around. But there wasn't one thing that I could point to and I could say, that's where he's going to beat Dhiego. That's where he's got his advantage. I just didn't see it. He's not overly fast, he's not overly technical, he's not overly powerful, and he's not a very big welterweight. I actually, when I look at Luke, I think he could drop down to lightweight and make the 156-pound limit. So his output also isn't very high. His defense is pretty poor, only 55% significant strike defense rate. One thing I do like is that he mixes things up pretty well. What I mean by that is 22% of his significant strikes landed are to the legs, 18% to the body. So 40% of Luke's significant strikes below the neck. I like that. But as I said, I'm just not able to point to any one thing and say that's where he has the advantage over Dhiego. So although Dhiego only has 4 knockouts in his 14 wins, he has drastically improved his striking over the last couple of years, specifically over the last couple of fights. I mentioned his KO, his knockout over Chad Laprise. Super impressive. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch Dhiego Lima versus Chad Laprise. Chad is a really, really good striker who is also really hard to hit. Chad is number 1 on the UFC middleweight roster in significant strike defense. He is number 2 on the roster for strike differential, and he is number 4 in strikes landed per minute. Chad Laprise is a very good striker. Dhiego Lima knocked him out with 1 punch. Really improved his striking lately. And when you look at the Court McGee fight, Diego's last fight, Court McGee is a really good striker. You can find Court McGee on a lot of the active middleweight roster stat leaders when it comes to striking. Court's got really good wins. I believe he even has a win over Robert Whittaker. Court McGee does. And Dhiego got the unanimous decision victory over him. So I think in addition to Diego's striking being drastically improved, his size is going to pose a real problem for Luke, I think. I mentioned his height and reach advantage, but Dhiego Lima used to be a middleweight who's dropped down to welterweight. When Dhiego Lima walks into the ring on Saturday night, he's going to be about 200 pounds, if not more. So not only is Luke a small welterweight, Dhiego is a former middleweight dropping down. So I think striking advantage Dhiego. When it comes to grappling, Luke gives up takedowns to almost all of his opponents. Now, he's a good scrambler and he gets good reversals and he wins a lot of his fights, but he gives up takedowns to almost all of his opponents. Dhiego Lima lands 2.13 takedowns per 15 minutes. He's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he inflicts or lands over 50% of his significant strikes on the ground. So when you're Luke and you're looking at a guy who's a brown belt who gets a lot of takedowns and lands over 50% of his strikes on the ground, that's not a good recipe for success in this fight. In addition to that, I mentioned Dhiego's size. There isn't a bigger advantage in mixed martial arts when in regards to size than in wrestling. Oftentimes, smaller strikers can go toe-to-toe with bigger strikers. There's a lot of advantages to that being the smaller striker, actually. Cardio, hydration, speed, stamina. A lot of advantages to being the smaller striker when you're on the feet. Not to say that they have the same knockout power as the bigger fighter. Sometimes they do. But there are advantages to being a smaller fighter striking. There are virtually no advantages to being the smaller wrestler. Or the smaller Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter. If you're the same skill, the bigger guy, it's got an advantage there. So when it comes to grappling, Dhiego Lima, clear advantage. My prediction for this fight, Luke Jumeau is tough, so I think he'll hang in there. But I got Dhiego Lima by unanimous decision all day if he doesn't get the finish. One thing I want to do differently in these videos now is I usually give my prediction for the heads-up matchup, who's going to win, but I also want to start giving you guys some insight into what I think about the betting lines, all right? Because oftentimes I may pick a fighter to win, but my recommendation, if you're betting out there, is going to be to bet on the other guy because of how confident maybe I am and the line, right? In this fight, Luke is plus 120. So when I look at the underdog and I think of what are his chances of winning and what kind of money are you going to get when you bet a unit. So you bet $100 to win 120 on Luke. I don't like that at all. I'm smashing Dhiego in this on this line right here at minus 150. I think Dhiego wins this fight 2 out of 3, maybe even 4 out of 5 times. I think he's better everywhere and he's bigger. I'm smashing Dhiego Lima on the betting line. Going into our third fight of the night, or at least on the main card. We got a heavyweight matchup between Tai Bam Bam Tuivasa and Sergey the Polar Bear Spivak. Betting odds for this fight: Tai Tuivasa minus 365 favorite, Sergey plus 275. Really interesting line. I'll touch on that later. A little bit of background. Bam Bam, Tai Tuivasa, he hails from Western Sydney, Australia, 26 years old, 6'2" with a 76-inch reach. Like almost all the Australian fighters we see in the UFC, Tai grew up a rugby player. Tai actually went pro, but had to quit due to developing a gambling addiction. So then he got into MMA. Here we are. When he started training MMA, though, and still to this day, he's a boxer and a kickboxer. Amassed a pretty good amateur record and went pro, went on a tear, was knocking out everybody in front of him, was 8-0 with 7 knockouts, and then he lost his last 2 fights. So the first loss of his career was against Junior Dos Santos. Not that surprising. Junior, former champion, and was also making, we were seeing a resurgence of Junior Dos Santos. And those were 2 guys that also just went to war in there. Heavyweight division, 2 guys going to war. Somebody's bound to get knocked out. Junior caught him, I think, with a good left hook. Could have been a right. Got on top of him, finished him on the ground. Not too surprising. Hats off to Tai for going out there and putting it all on the line. But in Tai's last fight, highly disappointing fight against Blagoy Ivanov. Tai seemed like a shell of himself in that fight. Could never really get anything going. Historically, we're used to Tai just moving forward, getting in your face, and swinging for the fences. One of the things that I love about Tai is that he really does put it all on the line, at least historically, when he fights. It's like you're either going out on your shield or he's going out on his. There's really no in between. But in the last fight against Blagoy, Tai never got anything going. So I'm really hoping in this fight we see the Tai that I myself and I know a lot of you have come to love, which is pressure fighter, moving forward, putting it all on the line. Sergey Spivak is a Ukrainian fighter, another young, talented heavyweight prospect in the division. He's got an impressive 9-1 record in MMA. All 9 of his wins were finishes, 5 submissions, 4 knockouts. But in his UFC debut against Walt Harris, I think it was back in May, he got absolutely obliterated by Walt Harris. So, is that because Sergey was highly overrated? Is it because Walt Harris is really, really good and we're seeing Walt sort of peak? It was maybe a combination of the both, but I'm leaning towards it was Walt Harris just going out there and being so fast and so powerful, and Sergey was just blasted from the start. It was a 50-second knockout. He got hit a couple times, didn't know what to do, started to cover up against the fence, and Walt just started to tee off on him. So Sergey, other than that, really talented dude, 9-1, 9 finishes. Looking at striking though, Sergey's long and powerful. He's got good speed, good combinations, but he doesn't strike well at distance. Sergey likes to get inside, get to the clinch. Not striking at distance can get yourself in trouble against Tai because Tai doesn't give you any distance. He moves forward, gets in your grill, and just starts taking it to his opponents. And so that could work for Tai and against Tai. It'll give Tai the opportunity to inflict damage like Walt did. Walt got right in his face and just started teeing off. Tai can do the same thing. But Tai can also get himself caught in the clinch where Sergey thrives. So Sergey gets you in the clinch, gets you out of position. He'll hit you with elbows, with fists, even with high kicks. We've seen Sergey land a few high kicks. Now, granted, they don't land as flush as typical high kicks land, so they don't do the sort of damage that we've seen other head kicks do, but he gets crazy up there and ultimately wants to get the takedown and inflict ground and pound. If there's one thing that Sergey excels at, it's ground and pound. Tai, on the other hand, Tai loves to stand and bang. Overall striking advantage, power advantage goes to Tai Tuivasa. 8 wins, 7 by knockouts. I know we didn't see it in the last fight, but I think Tai in front of his home crowd, Melbourne, Australia, we're going to see Tai want to go out there and put on a show. So Tai gets the advantage. Certainly the standing and striking advantage in this fight 100% goes to Tai. Grappling advantage, this is Sergey's clearest pathway to victory in my opinion. So I mentioned Sergey is primarily a fighter who wants to bully you, get physical with you, close the distance, clinch, knees, elbows, take you down to the ground, ground and pound and submissions. 9 fights, all finishes, 5 submissions, 4 knockouts. I think all of those knockouts came on the ground. I think maybe there was one that was on the feet. So clear grappling advantage here for Sergey. He moves really well on the mat. He's got good jiu-jitsu, excellent ground and pound. Tai advantage striking, Sergey advantage grappling. My prediction for this fight, Tai in front of his home crowd. He's going to want to start fast. He's going to want to put on a show. I think we see the Tai of old. I think he goes out there and gets it done with another first-round knockout over Sergey Spivak. Now, that said, the betting line. Pour money on Sergey Spivak. I say it again. I think my prediction for the fight is Tai gets a first-round knockout. If I'm betting money, I am pouring money on Sergey Spivak. I do not know why Tai is a minus 365 favorite. I think he's getting the first round knockout because it's the heavyweight division and he's going to want to put on a show. And I just think he connects. But Sergey has so many weapons that can negate Tai's offense. He could clinch Tai and start throwing mean knees to the gut, get him down to the ground, inflict mean ground and pound. He could submit Tai. Tai's not a grappler, he's a striker, and Sergey can win this fight. When I look at a line like plus 275 for Sergey Spivak, I am hammering Sergey as the underdog in this fight. I think Tai wins, but I think the line should be more like minus 210, maybe minus 220 for Tai, not minus 365. I think that line is way too big. I think Sergey should be more like plus 175, 160-ish on this with this matchup, not plus 275. So I'm putting $100, $200 on Sergey all day, 100 to win 275. I'm doing that all day on this fight. This is the heavyweight division, man. And you've got a young, talented prospect in Sergey Spivak who can win this fight. Tai's lost 2 fights in a row. He's not invincible. Sergey's lost. He's coming off of a loss too. But hey, this guy's dangerous. I'd be hammering Sergey plus 275 underdog. So the co-main event of the night. Out of the lightweight division, we've got number 6 ranked, Raging Al Iaquinta versus number 15, Dan the Hangman Hooker. Betting odds for this fight, Dan Hooker minus 155 favorite, Al Iaquinta plus 125. I've actually seen Dan a little bit higher than that on some bookies as well. A little bit of background, Alexander Iaquinta, 32 years old from Seaford, New York. When he's not selling real estate, he's a professional MMA fighter fighting out of the Serra-Longo fight team in New York. He's a wrestler, boxer, and a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's 5'10", 70-inch reach, 14-5 MMA record, coming off of a unanimous decision loss to Donald Cowboy Cerrone in May. Since losing to Michael Chiesa in the Ultimate Fighter finale back in 2012, Al Iaquinta has amassed a 9-3 record in the UFC. His only 2 losses since 2014, only 2 losses in the last 5 years. Donald Cowboy Cerrone in his last fight and Khabib Nurmagomedov. Since then, he has had highly impressive victories over some really tough fighters. Joe Lauzon, Jorge Masvidal, Dhiego Sanchez, Kevin Lee twice. So you know, he lost his last fight to Cowboy, which I predicted in one of my videos, but he actually looks better than he ever has and looks like he's truly peaking at 32 years old. Dan Hooker, a 29-year-old Kiwi with an 18-8 MMA record who fights out of City Kickboxing in Auckland, New Zealand, alongside Israel Adesanya, who's headlining this event. He's a big lightweight, 6 feet tall, 75-inch reach, which is huge in the lightweight division. He's got a 2-inch height advantage and a 5-inch reach advantage. Early on in Dan's career, he was a professional kickboxer. He was 9-1-3 in kickboxing, and he actually competed in submission grappling as well, where he amassed a 3-2 record in submission grappling. He specializes in kickboxing and Muay Thai, but he's also a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And although he's only a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 7 out of his 18 victories have come via submission. Dan's coming off of a first-round victory, a first-round knockout over James Vick in July, where he put Vick out cold. Striking. Statistically speaking, these guys are so evenly matched, it's ridiculous. Both guys land about 4.3 significant strikes per minute. Both guys target the head exactly 70% of the time. Body and legs the other 30% exactly. Al has finished 7 of his 14 wins by knockout, which is good for 50%. Dan has finished 10 of his 18 wins by knockout, which is good for 56%. Both fighters do virtually all of their striking at distance. Dan Hooker lands 84% of his strikes at distance. Al Iaquinta lands 91% of his strikes at distance. Al is 4th on the active UFC lightweight roster for knockdowns landed at 7. Dan Hooker is 7th on the list with 5. So what this means, ladies and gentlemen, is we have a true fight of the night contender. If you like kickboxing matches, look out for Dan Hooker and Al Iaquinta. The difference here comes in styles. So Al is a real crisp boxer who keeps his hands near his head. He moves in and out really well. He moves side to side really well and throws really good combinations. Also mixes it up well with body and legs, as we saw earlier. 30% of his strikes, body and legs, whereas Dan is a kickboxer. And Dan also keeps his hands really low. So he's more unorthodox in his movement and his angles and in his style of fight. His hands are low, he's a little more loose, whereas Al's hands are high. He's more of a traditional boxer. One thing that worries me about Al in this fight is I think Dan Hooker is going to be able to replicate a lot of what we saw give Al problems in the Cowboy Cerrone fight, which is reach and output and toughness. Dan actually has a longer reach than Cowboy and lands 6.02 significant strikes per minute. Excuse me, not significant, but strikes overall per minute. So that kind of pressure and consistency and toughness, I feel like could give Al problems over the course of 3 rounds. Dan's also deadly. He's got true knockout power in his hands and in his legs. One thing that scares me about Dan in this fight is his defense. Dan tends to always be open to taking your punch to give his, or taking your kick to land his. We saw him do that all throughout the Edson Barboza fight. Almost, he didn't care what Edson was going to hit him with as long as Dan could land what he was throwing. And we saw Dan's body break down in that fight. Even in his knockout against Gilbert Burns, if it weren't for Burns's lack of accuracy in that fight, Dan could have been knocked out. If you go back and you look at the final combination that led to Dan getting the knockout victory, Gilbert Burns was about an inch away from landing a devastating left hook on the side of Dan's chin. And it was because of Dan's carelessness with his hands. His right hand was down by his waist, as he was throwing a left hook of his own. And Gilbert Burns' left hook missed Dan's chin by an inch. So it's just this game is, you know, fighting can be won or lost in a matter of seconds or milliseconds and in a matter of inches. And that's one thing that scares me about Dan and his defense against Al Iaquinta. Dan has only a 54% significant strike defense rate, and he absorbs 5.13 significant strikes per minute. Whereas you look at Al, 63% defense rate, only absorbs 4 significant strikes per minute. So Al's power, I think, is also underrated. He's not a one-punch knockout artist, but he's not somebody you want to keep your hands down around. So I think each guy possesses a unique skill set on the feet when it comes to striking. And so I really can't give an advantage, a true advantage, to one fighter or the other. When it comes to grappling, though, this is Dan's clearest pathway to victory, in my opinion. Al is a very good wrestler. He's not the elite Khabib wrestlers, Justin Gaethje wrestlers of the division, but Al was a former high school and college wrestler. He was at a JUCO college, but it's translated very well to MMA wrestling. So although Al is a good wrestler, Dan's very dangerous on the ground. He's only a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but out of his 18 wins, he's got 7 submissions. And they come in a variety of ways. They're both guillotines and rear naked chokes, but he's also got triangles and arm bars. And so Dan, being as long as he is and as strong as he is, you can't get yourself into awkward positions with him on the ground or shoot a lazy double leg and he wraps your neck up. So I think that Dan has an advantage on the ground, but that's not where this fight's going to take place. Dan is way too comfortable in his kickboxing and his boxing to have the sort of game plan like, I need to take Al down or allow him to take me down so I can start working on my submission game. That's not going through either of these fighters' heads. I think for as long as this fight lasts, if it's 15 minutes, I think it's 15 minutes of kickboxing. So my prediction for this fight, it's changed. Honestly, it's gone back and forth. I even called my brother and said, Dan Hooker, Al Iaquinta, who you got? And we spoke about it for maybe 15, 20 minutes. I still didn't know. So at first, I thought my prediction was going to be Al Iaquinta that this fight was going to go into the third period tied at 1-1. Both fighters with a round. And I thought that Al Iaquinta would put it all on the line in the third and outpoint Dan, get the 2-1 decision. But my gut is telling me that Dan Hooker is going to get the finish. I don't know what it is. I don't know how. I don't know if it's punches, kicks, knees, submission, a combination of it all. Something inside of me is just telling me that Dan's in his backyard. Al's traveling to the other side of the world. It's in Marvel Stadium, 60,000 people. Dan Hooker is really dangerous, and outside of the Edson Barboza fight has been on a tear, knocking everybody out. And I just think that Dan is going to make something special happen on Saturday night. And so I'm taking Dan Hooker by a second round TKO in this fight over Al Iaquinta. But when we're looking at the betting line here, my opinion is Al Iaquinta is a dog. He is as tough as they come. Cowboy couldn't finish him. Khabib couldn't finish him. He's got wins over Kevin Lee twice. He's got wins over George Masvidal. Al Iaquinta is a dog, and he is truly deserving of his ranking in the lightweight division right now. And you want to call Al Iaquinta an underdog against anybody not in the top 5, 6 of this division, smash Al Iaquinta as the underdog. I believe he's plus 125 right now. I think anytime Al Iaquinta is the underdog against anybody not in the top 5 of this division, you should seriously consider putting your money on him. And that's my recommendation for this fight too. Yes, my gut is telling me Dan Hooker is going to win this fight in Melbourne, but my brain is telling me if Al Iaquinta is the underdog against Dan Hooker, you put your money on Al Iaquinta. So thanks everybody for tuning in for this video. That wraps it up. In my next video, I'm going to be covering the main event. So Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya for the undisputed middleweight championship of the world. If you liked what you saw on this video, please like and subscribe. As always though, comment below. Let me know who you think's going to win, why you think they're going to win, and how you think they're going to win. And I'll always do my best to engage with you guys. I appreciate you tuning in, and we will see you on the next video.